Hello and welcome once again to The Booking Club, the podcast that brings you today's leading authors and commentators from a table at their favourite places to eat and drink. I'm your host, Jack Alvain, and on this episode I'm going to be speaking to first-time novelist Leo Robson about his new work of fiction, The Boys. Leo Robson, welcome to The Booking Club and congratulations on publication day.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
This is your first novel, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah.
The Boys. I've just finished it this morning and greatly enjoyed it. You write fantastically. It's been a bit of a journey getting to the point of writing your first novel, I take it.
Yeah, I mean, I probably could have done it ages ago. Even this book, I suppose, was accepted by a publisher quite a long time ago, and then I sort of wanted to do more to it and just kept going, basically, which is not really what you're supposed to do with novels, really. Like, yeah, I guess it did take me a while. I mean, there are loads of scenes involving these characters that no longer exist, and I suppose the way I was thinking about it earlier when I was walking here actually is like, maybe instead of like writing novels that didn't quite come off or that I gave up after 30 pages, I just sort of kept faith with these characters and this world. And so, like, rather than being like, oh, I'm going to throw that again and start again, I had that successive process or processes with this text, with this world, I suppose.
You stuck with them. You stuck with the world you'd created, with the characters that you created.
Yeah, rather than, like, even when it wasn't working, or even when I realised I was writing yards of dialogue that no one was ever going to want to read or that didn't really make a scene, rather than just being like, this is dead, my friend, the filmmaker Whit Stillman, once said something that's kind of quite inspiring but also very doom engendering as well, which is that, like, he said, until something's good, it's not good. So essentially, you can't really say, oh, this idea doesn't work. And also, what is DNA? Like, if you change something enough, haven't you fundamentally altered or modified the DNA of the material? You know, so it's sort of like anything that's interested you at all, there's probably a reason for it, or there's probably something in it. And I did have times where I'd been working on this for ages, or had versions of it on my computer for ages. And rather than that making me feel sort of downbeat or pessimistic about the prospects, that in a way was almost like encouraging, as in like, well, I'm still here. Not I'm still here, they're still here, or, you know, it's still on. Even though the fundamental premise, like a family or social comedy against the backdrop of the Olympics, that wasn't never really something where I was like, oh, this is like a killer idea in a kind of entrepreneurial sense. I mean, I think I like what I've made of it in the end, but it wasn't really that per se. It was just like tone and scenes. So yeah, I just kept going.
You mentioned novelists who produce their first works in their 20s. How old are you now?
39.
39. And did you have, as I think a lot of aspirant writers do in their 20s, a pang or prolonged pang of anxiety about, I need to get something out in my 20s? Did you fetishize the 20s?
Really.
Or did you feel then, as you do now, that it was better that you didn't publish anything in your 20s?
Oh, no, I don't know whether it's better, because I don't, it's a bit of a counterfactual. Well, is it? I mean, I suppose there were versions. I mean, I guess I did write fiction when I was in my 20s, but there weren't like whole novels that like nearly got to publication or didn't or whatever.
Was the version that you'd written originally vastly different from the book that we see published today?
You mean the one that actually was accepted for publication?
Yeah, the years before it actually came out, yeah.
It was quite different. Like, as in...
Interesting.
I mean, as in, like, the house was different. Yeah, like, a lot of the stuff, like, the whole set, for it, just take a random example, like, almost 6,000 words of the novel appeared in the magazine The Fence. Yeah, I mean, there's so much new stuff. I mean, the whole opening is new. The house used to be in a different place.
We're referring already to the characters and objects that appear in the book, so we should talk about those in a second. It's set over a fortnight during the 2012 Olympics, and I think that actually maps on quite well to where we're sat here today, because, well, at least from an anecdotal perspective, my end, during that period of time, during those 2012 Olympics, I was living in China, and we are sat in Jincheng Alley, which is a lovely Chinese restaurant. So I'm told, looks very authentic. I've had a look at the menu. We've already decided roughly what we want to order, but you chose to come here. Is Chinese your favorite cuisine, would you say?
Well, probably Indian. My inch it, but just somehow feels unhealthier, which is pretty unscientific.
Evidently, you're quite fond of Chinese, though. As am
I really do. I've always enjoyed it. Like, I used to, because I grew up in London. Like, I used to come into town with my mum, and we'd usually, often at my insistence, we would go to this place, Mr. Wu, which still exists. I think it used to be all you can eat for like $4.50. I don't know what it is now, but I think probably still quite cheap. There used to be a few dotted around Chinatown. I think there was one on Wardour Street, one on Shaftesbury Avenue. I think there's still at least one. So it wasn't very sophisticated. I guess it was broadly Cantonese food. Now my own children love it, and they love the Lamian, the Lanzhou Lamian noodle bar, which is this weird place because it's like you definitely can't book. It's very like crammed often and so on, and you kind of have to apologise for it a bit, especially because at the front there's all this kind of like tourist trap takeaway food, which is kind of different from the main menu. Hi. Yeah.
Could I please order the sliced beef noodle soup with chili oil and the deep fried green beans with mincemeat? Thank you.
Is it possible to have the mapo tofu without pork? Yeah, so one of those. Then could we also have the aubergine and the spicy beef Szechuan, this one, and then just a bit of rice, just one bowl of plain rice.
Yeah, that'll do for me. That'll do.
Thanks.
Thank you.
For now, yeah, perfect. Thank you.
But all the characters in this book, it gives you a real sense of what it means to grow up in London. I mean, the familiarity with it and the way that the London 2012 Olympics obviously occurs to them is something that I think in the beginning of the book, Johnny talks about how it's, it wasn't really meant for them. It feels like something of a passing of the baton to a new generation.
Yeah.
Do you remember that period fondly? I mean,
I don't really remember. It sounds silly and maybe untrue, but I have no memory of it, really. I don't think I took any interest in it.
It's so funny because the impression I got was this period of time loomed large enough in your mind and your memory to want to base the novel during that period.
I don't remember why I chose to set it then, to be honest. I could go through most of this novel I wrote, like sending myself Gmail messages to myself. So I could probably find the first reference to like the London Olympics, and actually the emails would be called The Boys, because that was originally just going to be the name of the first part of the book, which it wasn't going to be like this book times 5. It was going to be the same as this book, but it was going to begin, I think it was going to have 3 or 4 sections, and the first was going to be called The Boys. But in the end,
tell us, who are the boys then?
I'm not sure, actually.
I literally saw a post on your Instagram just now to mark publication day where you referred to the boys as more of a metaphor.
Oh, that was a sort of joke, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, as in I called it a subtle metaphor. I mean,
I thought I knew who the boys were when I read the novel. Now I'm not so sure.
I mean, so there are various male characters in it, including these 2 central half-brothers, Johnny, the narrator, and Lawrence, who's 8 years older than him, and they have a different father. So obviously, in some sense, they're the boys. Then also, there are other senses in which that don't necessarily even come up in the book, but like I was thinking a lot about immature men. So I mean, there's a bit where they explain that their aunt, in one case, step aunt, I suppose, refers to them as the boys, even though they're both adults. So I guess that's where the title officially comes from. But early on, a female character, who's one of the sort of slightly chorusy figures in the book, does refer to something or other being all the same, like boys. So I guess there's this idea that it's a whole species. Then Johnny falls in with a much younger guy who's also not a child, called Harvey, who's a student at the university where Johnny has a kind of clerical job. Then also he has a nephew, or half-nephew, I suppose, called Jasper, who is still a boy. And when he first meets Lawrence properly, his older half-brother, he wasn't quite a boy, but he was a teenager. And so there's all that. But then I also was thinking a little bit about like the governments that we've had, and like I wouldn't necessarily tar Gordon Brown with this, but I remember Gabor Mate, the Canadian clinician and psychologist, talking about going through lots of leaders actually, and talking about the relationship between like trauma and kind of the damage that great leaders often cause, and he referred to Blair as a bland-faced schoolboy, and so I guess Blair, and then I think probably even more so the Cameron and Osborne and Clegg. I mean, they used to, I mean, I've removed stuff from the book, so I didn't want there to be too much like chat or topical stuff or would-be satire or whatever. But yeah, there was stuff about George Osborne in it, and I still have a bit about Blair and Brown where they met and for their very own booking club when they met at the Sicilian restaurant Granita on Upper Street.
On Islington Green, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Which I was just in Islington Green. And yeah, for people who don't know, in 94, after John Smith died, there was this meeting between Brown and Blair about who was going to actually go forward to be the next Labour leader, because they weren't going to fight against each other. I guess because they'd split the vote, but also because they didn't want to create enmity. Thank you very much. And yeah, and so I guess I was thinking about all that. There are probably other uses of the word boy in it, but yeah, it's sort of it obviously does refer to like the two main characters, but also I suppose a lot of the men in it are like, I hadn't really had this thought before, but Johnny's father, we learn, has moved from Vienna quite suddenly after Germany invaded, or the Anschluss. And so he's kind of arrested at that age that he is. Like, he's very sentimental about Vienna. He tells this story again and again about being like about being a bow-tied little boy traveling, taking this sort of journey suddenly out of his homeland. I hadn't really thought about that before. And then also, I suppose, because Johnny lost his father, this character I just mentioned dies when Johnny's about 10. I suppose he's arrested maybe in Boyishness. I also kind of had this idea, which comes up a little bit, that like people of my generation maybe, who grew up in the so-called end of history period of the 90s, have this like almost maybe like spiritual complacency. Like, I feel like we're kind of maybe in a way less interesting than like the generation before us, which was like Gen X, or the generation afterwards who were more overtly radicalized by the financial crisis and student top-up fees and so on. Like, there was a kind of boring mainstreamism, like people used to call like Oasis and stuff like indie, like, as in there was this period that there was actually loads of interesting stuff going on in British music in reality, but there was this idea that like the stuff that was super duper mainstream was kind of like cool and edgy or whatever, which is just generally, I mean, I guess it applied, thank you, it applied in film as well. For those who can't see, I've actually been served all of the things I ordered, and Jack has not been served any yet. So
this is true.
Yeah, that's what happens. Don't be the host.
It looks like an enormous quantity for just one person, so we'll certainly get through it.
No,
I think it's interesting that you mentioned this. I saw an article online today about what makes millennials cringe to Gen Z, and going through it, everything from the refusal to wear crew socks and the ankle socks that we wear to hide the fact that we're wearing socks, to the fact that our humor is so self-deprecating, where they take a more absurdist approach. But I think it points to the fact that, we are the last generation. And I say this definitively because I think anything post-internet meant that you were aware that there was a culture that was shared, simultaneous, and kind of top down. This sort of outlook has given millennials a slight, you mentioned spiritual complacency. I think that it makes us somewhat reluctant to completely let go of the structures that we enjoyed, that we kind of came to the world through, whereas I think Gen Z are much more happy to be atomized. We sort of talk about atomization as a societal problem. I think that Gen Z sort of see it more as freedom from constraint.
And also I think some of the stuff we got to enjoy, was obviously the product of like the older Thatcher bred generation. Like I listen to this podcast that's done by people who are roughly my age or very similar to me at my age, Football Cliches, and I really enjoy it. And it feels characteristic of like people my age, that kind of like just constant wit or deflective irony and so on. And it's just literally an examination of like the language around football, and it's done brilliantly. But when I actually think about the central influences on it, all of it's like it would be like The Office, Alan Partridge, because it's about like taking the piss out of like people who are straight-laced and unself-aware or whatever. Those influences are all kind of older. Obviously that's how it works. You can't, when we were 15 we weren't making BBC comedy shows, we were enjoying those made by older people. But I just feel like, I don't know. I don't know enough about what people my age are like doing in various fields. I'm sure loads of them are really interesting, but there is something about the sort of dominance of like the pervasiveness of like mainstreamness in the 90s.
Yeah.
Often, I've not made this connection before, I don't think consciously, but often in the name of like alternative. So like Tony Blair and Clinton as well, painting themselves as the third way, when it was all just such bollocks or like just such familiar shit, really. And often either familiar liberal stuff or just quite conservative and repressive or whatever.
It's easy to see all that in high definition looking back. But yeah, as you say, it really wasn't apparent at the time.
I mean, some of that stuff was apparent to some people. But yeah, the general, the consensus.
And these cultural references you mentioned, The Office, of course, the Blair government, all come up in the book.
There is a mention of The Office.
There is a mention of The Office.
Two that was probably just to establish. I was aware I was in the flashback. I was going successively through years, so I was just like, early 2000. I don't think it had a significance or applicability. Not that you're saying it did, but
no.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
One thing you mentioned, which we'll come back to after we've had a chance to chow down here, is the way in which your interest in language, picking it apart, analysing it, you'd think comes naturally to a writer. I imagine it does. But it's very explicit in this book. The character is always listening out for ambiguities, slight ironies. The dialogue, too, between characters. They're always picking up on each other's use of language.
Playing around with it and so on is just a product or reflection of the luck I've had to be surrounded by like incredibly creative and quick-witted people, basically.
Are a lot of these characters and the way that they speak tributes to those people you've known?
Yeah, but it's obviously like very inflected with like, movies and so on. And, I like talky movies or movies that are about language or usage, like Clueless or Fred Skepsi's film of John Guar's play, The Six Degrees of Separation with Will Smith, which is all about people telling stories. I mean, most of my favourite films, I realised, have like voiceovers and people telling stories to each other, the kind of Joseph Conrad thing, I suppose. I do love that form. But in terms of verbal analysis and so on, I don't know. I think I've just known a lot of witty people, especially women, I suppose. But I mean, and I guess I have done a lot of journalism about books, so I guess I'm thinking about... to be honest, I'm struggling to answer the question because I haven't had that many conversations with people who've read the book, and no, I'm sure what you're saying is totally accurate. I'm aware that the characters are chatty and witty, but in terms of this specific thing about talking about language and so on...
There's just one, for example.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
And we will use in a moment. I mean, where it jumped out was simply where Johnny sees a cup that says, "I love Reading" on it, and he can't work out whether it's the city or the pastime. And he makes those comments internally to the reader constantly. He always hears a stray word. It could have been this, it could have been that.
I could be wrong, but I think on the advice of my friend, the writer Lamorna Ash, I drastically cut down the number of times where he did that for the reason that ticks are annoying or reductive, but also probably more culpably. I'm not sure I'd even clocked that, which obviously
it just something occurred to me. I was like, Leo likes doing this. It's something that he enjoys doing.
I guess in a way it's quite interesting because the characters, not Johnny himself, but the older half-brother Lawrence is a bit of an addicted reader or whatever. The parents have books around, although neither of them is really an intellectual. Well, no, they're not at all. But the book is also full of London geography. In fact, I haven't looked at reviews in detail, and there haven't been that many, but there was the only one I read on Goodreads was someone I think gave it 2 stars and said, it seems like this person was more interested in naming places in London than coming up with a plot for their book. I was like, yes. So a reader who nailed my intention.
We're actually not far from many of the streets where the book takes place.
Yeah, surprise.
Anyway, enough of that. I've just done an incredibly millennial thing and taken a photo of everything that's on the table.
Well,
it's actually quite spectacular amount of food.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough. Let's eat. Calling small business owners. Tired of feeling invisible online? Meet Total Solutions, your modern-day Yellow Pages reimagined for the digital age. Whether you're a service provider looking for more clients or someone searching for the right pro to get the job done, Total Solutions connects local businesses with local people. You can list your services, network with other business owners, or even post jobs if you're the one looking for help. Ready to grow your business or find the next go-to expert? Head to totalsolutions.com to join the community. That's totalsolutions.com. Wow, what a feast. So on the table here, we've got a series of decimated plates. That was absolutely delicious. Could you remind the listeners, please, Leo, what we ordered, what you ordered?
I had the Mapo tofu without pork and some boiled beef, Sichuan style, in a enormous sort of chili oil bowl. And we also had some stir-fried aubergine in a kind of sweet and sour,
delicious, yeah. And
sauce.
I had this the sliced beef and the noodle soup with chili oil. It was excellent. We were talking just before we broke to eat about millennial cringe and the propensity to feel very nostalgic for the 90s and noughties. It's actually a subject that's come up in a lot of the episodes I've done for one reason or another.
Yeah, I mean, early in the novel, Johnny is hanging out with this younger pair, and they sort of take the piss out of him for not really being intellectually motivated or interested. Partly a generational reflex, they reckon. So they just sort of ask him about his life experiences on the grounds that at least he has those. That's an advantage he might have over them. Anyway, some of the stuff they talk about includes the 1990s, and then it comes up again. And he says, Harvey asked me again about New Labour. I tried to capture the sense of expectation, the unabashed excitement that attended Blair's landslide victory. I was 15, and I loved the brightness, the constant talk about the future, the encouragement to believe that you can be who you really want to be. I mentioned that I had once seen Tony Blair's favourite advisor, Peter Mandelson, in the street, twice in fact, but the reaction I described occurred the first time. It was like bumping into God, or God's sidekick, anyway, I said. I was waiting for my friend Kate on Wimpole Street, right in central London, and I had this thought that everything around me would have been different if it weren't for him and his colleagues, but maybe especially him. The multiculturalism, the safety of the streets, and now looking back, yes, the sheen, the sense of everything being for sale. Harvey asked me how it had left me feeling. Heady, I replied. It still does, really. Regardless of what went wrong, Iraq, the low-level corruption, the Millennium Dome, all the stuff they'd been up to all along, in that moment he seemed untouchable. I didn't mention that when I struggled to sleep, I would use the university's electronic resources to look back through all the excited newspaper coverage from 1994 and 1995. But how can you indulge in such nostalgia when you know you were going to be disillusioned? He asks. I mean, we're sitting with the results of everything those chumps did and didn't do. Failing hospitals and tax legislation, the inflicting of the Olympics. You know it was never any good. This sounded less like an intellectual obligation than something he was personally angry about. I said, I'm not quite sure. Maybe because it wasn't fate? Things might have gone differently? Or we didn't know they would go that way, even in fact they were always bound to? I'm not sure there's such a thing as safe remembering. I felt self-conscious about the grandeur of my tone or obscurity of the sentiment, and added, I don't reckon. Then I had another thought. But it isn't nostalgia exactly. It's thinking back to something as it really was, in the moment, if you were young enough and incentivized to believe. It's not that I want to return. This is where I want to be, at this sort of distance, thinking about then. Rory asked, wouldn't you have preferred to ruminate on a different thing, something less failed or spoilt? You mean like a project that fulfilled its promises or still exists? Yes, Harvey said, obviously. Not really, I replied.
How much of this is drawn from your own experience?
I remember the day in May 1997 when Blair won the election. I remember the day John Smith died 3 years earlier. I remember I was on a school trip. When would that have been? I think April 94, something like that. So I remember all that stuff, but I suppose my sense of having the analysis of it or perspective of it probably waited until Nick Cohen's Pretty Straight Guys, which is a reference to Blair after their kind of very first scandal, the Bernie Ecclestone tobacco sponsorship of the Formula One stuff. Referred to himself as, I like he said, I like to think I'm a pretty straight kind of guy, or a pretty straight sort of guy, which I don't think was totally true, but even in the ways in which it was true, it was still a problem. Yeah, and I don't know, Blair, Mandelson famously said this thing, we're intensely relaxed about people getting very rich.
Well, wasn't that one of Labour's great mottos? We don't mind people getting filthy rich as long as they pay their taxes.
I can't remember when it was in a speech or in like a seminar type thing that Mandelson said that. I don't really remember thinking about it all the time. Like when I was growing up, like the Tories were so hopeless. Not that one didn't want them to be in a way, but they were so hopeless that, like, I don't know, you didn't always need to follow like politics, in the sense that, you know, Blair won three elections. And none of them was particularly close. I mean, they were increasingly close, but none of them was particularly close. I actually remember where I was when Blair announced that he was stepping down. I was at university. It was the summer of 2007, and I was in a meeting of the Warwick Board, the student newspaper where I worked as deputy arts editor. It did feel quite dramatic, and he was obviously clapped out of the Commons and all that, but despite saying, not inaccurately, that he'd never been much of a House of Commons type, but more relevantly, it also, you know, presided over stuff that people justly had contempt for, voted against, or would have voted against if they'd been given more of an opportunity to do so, or whatever. It's hard to say, you know, the problem with analysing historical events is that it does sort of put the ball in your court, like what would have been better, what would have worked better. There wasn't like, maybe if John Smith hadn't died, but I mean, he was kind of a reforming, modernising Labour guy anyway.
It is set during a very, very specific period, a transition period, letting go of what was. But this is, of course, not to overemphasise the political setting of the story. Yeah. Because we're getting away again from some of the characters. I mean, this has been described as a story about loss and confusion. Do you think that's accurate? You've already spoken about Johnny having lost his father.
Yeah.
You know, there's that to set us up in terms of his situation.
It's about confusion in like the sense of like people getting their lives wrong and misunderstanding things. Like, I mean, for example, he's very preoccupied with like a teenage relationship that his older half brother had, which even he knows didn't last very long, and its ending is now 17 years from the past. I say even he knows. I mean, he can't but know that, but for whatever reason, he holds on to it. I guess not in a very different way from he holds on to the spectral period in which New Labour seemed to be good news or whatever. And so, yeah, and like that, he's very particularly fascinated with like things like whether or not this woman knew that when the older brother came back, having been estranged from the family, and promised that he'd brought him a present of a football, whether she would or would not have known that he was lying about that, and what her attitude was to him lying to a little boy about that. Or similarly, he's very preoccupied with where they first met. Did they or did they not meet at a youth club where they grew up in East London or whatever? And I suppose it's not supposed to be in your face irony that these are like ludicrous, not fripperies, but like irrelevancies and sort of slightly strange objects of sentimentalism. He's trying to like, he's holding on to some slightly strange things. Not to say that we can have a clear normative sense of like what is the right stuff to think about, what is the right way to live or anything like that.
Yeah. But these, as you say, these reflections on historical events and there's nostalgia for a period that might have affected, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of lives, and then his reflections on events that occurred in his life. It does seem to me that, yeah, the book is largely to do with remembrance and about getting events right and remembering things correctly and questioning whether you do remember things correctly. And that in the sense of the confusion, I guess, the confusion about what we remember. It's
not just across time, though, because you can also just get things very wrong in the present moment, like as in he develops strong ideas about this younger woman, Rory, and I suppose the reader is supposed to notice, partly because his friend Kate points it out in the first scene, that like he knows fuck all about this person, doesn't even know her name.
Right.
So yeah, you know, in both cases there's an inflation going on. There's a kind of romanticization, I guess, is not a bad word for it.
Going back to the beginning of the conversation where you spoke about the long gestation period of this novel, how do you feel now that it's published? I mean, it's been in the womb a long time, Leah.
Yeah, I mean,
do you feel a relief?
I'm so used to writing articles, some of which have taken me a very, very long time and involved lots of work and thinking, that like the emphasis in those scenarios is just like not really on the like eventual arrival into the world. It's like if it's not really about the process, you know, the ratio of like work, you know, what is, you know, so the book's published today. I don't know. I guess like the moment of arrival was when like me and John Riley, the editor, decided that we liked it, I suppose, you know, or that it was like, I don't know. It's
today doesn't feel like the moment it arrived.
Well, partly because I first saw it in a bookshop on Friday and I just saw it in Waterstones Piccadilly. I don't know, but I think the book looks really cool, but like maybe it's because we're internet era and like I've read great stories and novellas by Henry James on Gutenberg, HTML or whatever, but like, I mean, obviously I'm really happy that my book is out in the world and I can see it, but this is probably partly from being a journalist or a critic or whatever. It's like, I so narrowly associate all this stuff with like me on my own, like in a library in my room. Like, it just feels like a different thing, like it just being in the world, like even answering questions about it, because obviously 90% of what we've talked about, what you've raised, and I've never given any thought to really.
I figure you will get used to talking more and more about this book, but I think you'll probably discover, not that I know, but that most writers sort of say after a while, you know, the alienation you feel from your own work or the ability to move on becomes from having spoken about it
so much. Yeah. I also like, I don't know how other writers deal with it, but like, it's been a while since I've been dealing with this book in a way, like the text. So like, you probably know it way better than me, like having just read it.
Having read it at speed, actually, over the last few days to a week, I guess gives me the sort of a rounded sense of it.
Yeah, you would have noticed more like connections or whatever. It's weird when you write something though, because obviously quite a lot of the material that allowed the bits to come about is then taken away. And you're left with what you're left with, and you're like, oh, this reminded me of this, and the process of these things is so amorphous or kind of nebulous that you kind of like, I guess it's a little bit like when we pontificate about movies, and then like someone in the film industry is like, well, that was because, like, you know, or is it that Kurosawa thing? Why did you choose that shot? You know, oh, because the film took place in the medieval era and there was an airport on one side and a McDonald's on the other, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
these contingencies. I mean, I'm not saying the book is like, you know, thematically incoherent or whatever, but some of its tautness or like unity or whatever is probably came about in a kind of quite rough and tumble way.
One thing I noticed about this book is that the story has a consistently steady pace. There were moments where I thought, is something going to happen that's going to dramatically accelerate or decelerate or stop things in their tracks? Again, it only takes place over a fortnight, but crazy things can happen in a fortnight.
Yeah. I guess, like, in terms of literal modification, like the difference between fictional time and real time, there is variety, because sometimes you get, like, I mean, this is probably true of all books, but sometimes you get a scene that takes place over several pages, and then other times she's like, oh, those days were spent doing this or whatever. You know, it's not in real time exactly.
Yeah, let's talk about the dialogue, because I found that the dialogue, again, there's a lot of sparring in the dialogue, and I imagine it must be quite difficult when you are, as you say, you've written much longer lengths of dialogue before, to know when to cut it off.
Yeah,
because a lot of the conversations that occur in this book are conversations that people really have. There isn't necessarily an obvious end point.
I mean, I agree. I guess I tried to like make sure that the chat was never just chat. Like, either not because it was like necessarily conveying information, but like the dynamics were someone's getting annoyed with someone, or someone's talkativeness is like alienating someone else, or the talk is actually genuinely revelatory of like who they are or who they think they are.
Yeah, the characters do get on each other's nerves quite a lot, it seems.
Yeah, but by the standards of like conflict in narrative drama, it's pretty
It's
vanilla.
about a family at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's PG-13 stuff.
Here we are, just starting in a fairly random place here. This is Johnny talking to Lawrence. I said that there'd probably be a health and safety consideration as well, but he didn't register the comment. Instead, he propped his head forward and, exhibiting his familiar weary passion, said, "Strangers, their vast appeal." I mean, why do we even bother denying it, Johnny? It was tempting to point out that he never had. How they seem to equal everything. He paused. No. He looked at me sternly. No, almost everything. It's problematic. Sort of politically, you mean? Sorry? As in, you idealize them, strip them of... I struggle to find the noun. Don't trail off. Autonomy? What? No, God. I meant problematic for me. A waiter arrived with another plate of chicken and a bowl of shriveled, sweating vegetables. Lawrence glanced at him and muttered a couple of what sounded like Chinese words. The man slouched away, then came back instantly with tea. I poured us both a cup. Did I ever tell you, Johnny, that bedroom is an anagram of boredom? No, I lied.
I mean, in that case, yeah, he's got his older half brother who's more sort of damaged and anxious than he is, and he finds his worldview kind of for the reasons we talked about earlier, like some of the differences between Gen X and millennials or whatever, or Gen X and like 90s raised kids or whatever. He finds it like exotic and exciting, but it doesn't really apply to him because his way of being is sort of much more relaxed and shoulder shrugging. So it's sort of like, you know, at the end of the day, you've got to accept that like your wild biker mate is going to like ride off into the sunset and you're probably going to go back to your job as an estate agent or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, that's a metaphor. It doesn't apply to the book, but not an analogy. So it's sort of, yeah, but I mean, that I have read that bit that you read out, like sometimes if I'm doing a reading or whatever, like that is the kind of stuff I was trying to get down, yeah.
So the book's come out today, and tell us, what's your schedule looking like at this moment? It must be a busy time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not like doing the Eras tour or whatever. I just, I'm going to chat to some people about my book, going to do some events for my book, you know, a mixture of private and public things, you know, maybe skim read some coverage of the book.
And of course, there's the launch, which I'll be attending tomorrow, but for the benefit of listeners, that has already taken place.
Yeah, that's true. They'll already know all about it. On Thursday, the 15th of May, I'm doing an event at the Staffordshire Street Gallery in Peckham where I'll be talking to Lou Stoppard, and there'll be readings from other writers.
Excellent.
Then next month at the Owl Bookshop in Kentish Town, I'll be appearing with Rebecca Watson. There are going to be other things cropping up as well over the next few months. But yeah, those are sort of like the main public engagements that I'm doing. Yeah. Fantastic.
Maybe if we closed out the episode with a reading that takes place, I think my reading kind of mentions it, but one that takes place in a Chinese restaurant that you said earlier that you could read
this
from.
introduces the scene where they're talking about women and the spelling of the word bedroom and so on. Lawrence began shaking his dead leg into action as we approached the fringes of Bloomsbury, the area where he had studied almost 2 decades earlier and never stopped visiting. In the late afternoon humidity, things had assumed an almost liquid texture, an irresistible feeling of flow. It was nearly the end of the working day, and as we moved along Gower Street, an army of interns marched in the opposite direction, towards Euston and King's Cross. Lawrence charged on, disregarding all the cross streets until he turned right onto Brock Place, then stopped suddenly at a nondescript black metal door and knocked 3 times, prompting the appearance of a Chinese man in overalls. They hugged without saying anything. Lawrence turned to me with a look of confusion. "You are coming, aren't you?" Pieces of A4 paper with hand-drawn arrows blue-tacked onto the walls guided us through a maze of corridors lined with heaving coat racks and folded baize tables towards a circular walkway. Downstairs turned out to be a crabbed, low-ceilinged room around which a pair of waiters zigzagged awkwardly. The carpet was the familiar black cord. A hidden speaker system filled the air with the slow-motion self-pity of the sort of Chinese power ballad I'd only ever heard on past restaurant trips with Lawrence. Along the wall was a bank of television screens, each with its own VHS machine, showing different things: wrestling, and a weather report, and pornography, and football being played in Eastern Europe. What light there was came from the screens, from an open door by the kitchen, and from angle-poised lamps which some of the diners were using. I could feel Lawrence strenuously refusing to allude to any of it. As soon as we took our seats, a waiter came to our table, allowed a large bowl of gloopy chicken and gleaming rice to slide from a flat-edged tray, and withdrew. Lawrence served himself, then removed a pair of chopsticks from their sheath. Everything he put in his mouth was lightly dotted with soy sauce, and he didn't stop eating as he talked, which he was no more able to stop doing.
Thank you, Leo. I really enjoyed reading this book, as I said at the beginning of this episode. And if you have any memory or fondness for the memory of the 2012 Olympics, that time of a past administration fading into the distance and what was to come after, if you're nostalgic like I suspect you are, Leo, and I certainly know I am, then you will enjoy reading this book. Thank you very much for bringing us here to Jincheng Alley, and thanks for joining me on the Booking Club.
Thank you very much.